Welcome to NorCal Slot Car Scene. Today we're going to talk about the NSR Formula cars. In our club here in Northern California, the NSR Formula cars have quickly become one of the most popular classes. We run them completely stock, and today I'm going to go through some of the setup tips that I've used to develop a front-running NSR Formula car. The first thing I do with any slot car when setting it up for racing is true the tires. I true both the front and the rear tires. Keep in mind when you true tires on any car, use a very slow setting on your tire truer. If you use too fast of a setting, you won't get a good round flat tire. Once I've done that, the front tires are coated with nail polish. This makes them extremely slippery, and they just slide across the track and make the car handle a bit better. Once the tires are trued, I install the rear tires on the car, and it's time to set the front ride height as far as the guide is concerned. Spacers are used between the guide and the chassis to set the front ride height. I try to set this so the chassis sits relatively level or with a slight rake to the front relative to the rear tires. Make sure you route the lead wires so you have a nice loop in front and the guide is completely self-centering. After this is done, I reinstall the front axle with the wheel tire assembly. Now it's time to set the ride height of the front tires. I set this so they're just barely off the track. Because this car is inline based and has brass spacers to set the rear track, it can be a bit tricky to set up the rear axle so it doesn't bind. The first thing I do is move the wheels out a bit so there's plenty of play left to right in the axle. Second, unscrew the set screw in the crown gear. This will let the crown gear completely float and you can move the rear axle left to right laterally. Next, move the wheels back in so there's very little play in the rear end assembly. I'm looking for about 1 or 2 thousandths maximum play. This should let the rear axle spin freely. Next, give the whole assembly a spin and let the crown gear kind of naturally find where it wants to be and retighten the set screw. Now you've got that perfect play left to right, a very smooth gear mesh, and everything is set up properly. Finally, make sure you lubricate where the motor shaft contacts the crown gear. If you don't do this, this assembly will seize up and you'll break the crown gear. When I set up the motor pod, I tighten the screws so nothing actually moves. Then I back them off just a little bit so the pod is completely free but does not have any excess play in it. This takes a little tuning at the track because every track is slightly different. I also tune with tape. I put tape on the bottom of the chassis at the front of the motor pod. This allows the motor pod to completely be free but limit some of the movement. This again is where you're going to have to test at the track. You can move the tape forward or backward or take the tape off entirely to see what works for you on your track. One last thing. Make sure the screws that hold the motor in are nice and tight. That can definitely affect handling if the motor is rocking around in the motor pod. As far as weight on the chassis, I actually use very little. You can see here there's just 2 small pieces of lead, one on each side of the chassis. The long can motor in this car is actually pretty heavy and quite a bit heavier than the short can, so most cars with long cans don't require a lot of lead. But again, this is up to you and it requires tuning and testing on your track to find out what works the best and it gets the best lap times. Now it's time to mount the body. On this car, I use very little body movement, just enough so the body is not rigidly attached to the chassis. Now we're ready to go racing. Here are the 2 cars that I've built to compete in the NSR Formula 1 class. Both are very competitive and have won races in Northern California. The yellow car used to be a Jägermeister car, but I stripped the paint, painted it Tamiya camel yellow, and applied the Lotus decal set from IndyCals. I hope this video was helpful to you, and thanks for watching. This is Jim Rose with NorCal Slot Car Scene.